Now, the exclusive from Talk is the Ministry of Defence have spent 3.4 million on diversity staff. We heard from Tim Davies earlier, former fighter pilot, very outspoken, leading some of our news bulletins of what he describes the idiots who are putting these policy decisions into place. And this is 3.4 million that's been spent on diversity roles within the Ministry of Defence. That's what the figures have revealed that we here at Talk have uncovered through Freedom of Information Acts. And 62 full-time staff were employed by the MoD, civil servants and Britain's armed forces by February of this year. Just a little bit here. Salaries of full-time employees working on diversity and inclusion have increased, wait for it, by over 277% since 2019, when just shy of $1 million was spent on wages, according to previous FOI requests. And this, of course, at the time, Keir Starmer is telling us he can't say when, and let's be honest, even if defence spending will go up to 2.5% when we are facing the biggest threats I can remember in my lifetime. Elliot Keck, Head of Campaigns at the fantastic Taxpayers Alliance, joins me now. Elliot, welcome.
Very good morning, Nick.
I mean, if you are remotely sane or rational, you will understand that spending money on diversity and inclusion officers, not even just spending money on diversity and inclusion officers, but at the rate that it's been spent, at the rate that it's been increased, when as far as I can tell, if their goal is to improve recruitment and retention in the armed forces, they are failing on every measure. Last year, I think they lost 16,000 people who left the services effectively prematurely. This is not value for money for us taxpayers, is it?
Absolutely not, and it's a brilliant story from Talk, I have to say. It's one that the TPA would absolutely be proud of revealing. Listen, the British Army has been one of the most important and one of the most successful and competent and capable institutions in the British state for not just decades, but indeed centuries. And we achieved all those things without the need for millions of pounds worth of diversity officers. And given the shockingly small state to which the British Army has shrunk, it just speaks to the absolutely egregious misallocation of resources in so many parts of the British state.
Isn't that where you should start when you get into government? Then you look at what is being spent, what outcomes you desire, and where you are getting the worst return, and just get rid of them.
Well, listen, that would be my message to the Labour government. It's really interesting, actually, in your story, a comment from the new Labour government said that this was spending allocated by the previous administration. It's an absolutely reasonable thing to point out. It wasn't Labour officials that hired these staff or approved this increase in spending. Of course, the follow-up to that would be, OK, well, you know, are you going to now get rid of these roles? Are you going to use that £3.4 million on increasing the size of the army, purchasing new equipment, all of the other things that the British Army and the British defence system so desperately need? And given we are talking about potentially increasing defence spending to 2.5%, something I think taxpayers absolutely understand given the many threats around the world, we really need to see that huge boost in spending be used efficiently.
You know, I suppose it's probably fair to say, and you'll know this better than anyone else, but in any organisation, even private organisations, you're going to have waste. But it feels that when it comes to government, I think for as long as I can remember, from the moment I stepped into primary school probably, there have been promises to eliminate waste. And yes, that sounds good. But again, doesn't that make you feel rather futile? Doesn't it make you feel you're banging your head against a brick wall? For every exposure such as this and others, government still manages to spend money on matters with poor outcomes.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And about a year and a half ago, your story made me think of this because actually we uncovered at the Taxpayers Alliance that £11 million had been spent on diversity offices in UK prisons. Now, given the catastrophic state that UK prisons are in, with criminals now set to be released after only 40% of their sentence, you do wonder if that £11 million had been spent on more prison places, whether or not we'd be in a better situation now. But on the point on the private sector, it's really interesting. You're right, of course, big businesses do waste money, but there is a direct financial incentive within those big businesses to cut down on waste. You want to make more profit for your shareholders, you want to pay your employees more, and you want to cut your prices. In the public sector, unfortunately, those pressures do not exist. Civil servants and bureaucrats and politicians have shown far too much willingness to waste taxpayers' money, knowing that they can always tap them up for more.
I suppose there's also a reality that Labour are not going to want to make an issue of tackling these sorts of things, are they? Because their last Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has told them to avoid anything that remotely links to culture wars and so forth. So, can we expect them to allow the civil service, to allow the public sector to carry on spending money in this way, despite the warnings?
Well, unfortunately not. I don't think so. Although what I would say to the current government is not to view this as a cultural issue. That's one way, of course, to frame it, but just view it as a value for money issue, right? I mean, you now have public spending at well over £1 trillion. You have a tax burden at a record high, a point that the Labour opposition rightly hammered home during the election and before. If they want to increase spending money on vital frontline services while at the same time not increasing taxes, something that they, of course, solemnly committed not to do, then looking at these areas where, frankly, you're not getting value for money would be an excellent way.
How do we judge that value for money? I gave you an example at the beginning, is that the Ministry of Defence say, in a competitive age, our strength lies in the talent and skills of our people. Then they seem to draw a conclusion that they achieve that by, we want to recruit and retain the best people drawn from the broadest diversity of skills and background. Actually, shouldn't it be, we want to recruit the best people? Isn't that the outcome we should be measuring? And wouldn't that be a value for money judgment?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, I like to think, maybe this is old-fashioned, but I like to think that a meritocracy naturally attracts diversity, because there are brilliant people in all areas of the British public and the British people, regardless of ethnicity, gender, or whatever. So I believe that meritocracy naturally attracts those people. And I believe that, frankly, those people want to join organisations that are well-run, competent, efficient and capable, not organisations that focus on box-ticking exercises.
And yet, I think it would be fair to say that the army, for example, particularly, had some horrific examples of racism, probably about, I may have this wrong, about a decade ago, where recruits were clearly subject to it. And other organisations have also fared badly, the Met Police and so forth. Many people would argue you need positive campaigns to help eradicate that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just don't think that that's what we've actually seen from many of these diversity roles. They, as I said, they have become more about box-ticking exercises and pointless pet projects. So, I think that's absolutely a fair point to make. But I don't actually think that the record of these diversity roles, whether it's in the public or private sector, has actually been to improve things, regarding racism, sexism, and all the other horrific things, attitudes that we do continue to see in some of our institutions.
OK, listen, thanks very much indeed for joining me. That's Elliot Keck, Head of Campaigns, Taxpayers Alliance.